Hey guys, Godfather of Anxiety here. Just wanted to do a short video about avoidance behaviors. And in particular, I wanted to give you guys some insight into the particular avoidance behaviors that I experienced or developed with me while I experienced anxiety, and even some that developed as a result of clinical depression. Avoidance behaviors are a huge important topic for people with these anxiety disorders and even those with depression to understand, because it's in order to recover from these conditions, you absolutely need to acknowledge and realize exactly what you're doing and how it's contributing to the severity of the anxiety symptoms that you're experiencing. And that's what avoidance behaviors do. They perpetuate the anxiety. They intensify it. Your world will get small. So that's why I wanted to do this short video, to give you guys some insight as far as what I experienced. And, if you guys are noticing some of the same things, then if you aren't getting treatment, you need to get to a mental health professional and seek treatment, because it's definitely interrupting your life. So the first one I want to mention is social situations. Now, that's a broad, that covers a broad spectrum of activities. What in particular, it basically included everything, and it even included work. That's why I just barely remained employed during the 6 years that I was experiencing severe anxiety disorder. The level of avoidance behavior as far as being around people and specifically having conversations with them, even necessary conversations that were work related, I would keep as short as possible. I'm sure there's probably people who knew me during this time that wondered why I walked away mid-sentence, or, ended conversations rather abruptly, not rudely, but abruptly, because during this time, I'm holding my breath. That's how uncomfortable I was in social situations. There was a number of contributing factors to this. I mean, I had intrusive thoughts that didn't help when dealing with people. In general, my thoughts were racing. So again, that's not something that's going to help when you're trying to have a cohesive conversation with another human being. So, I just tried to avoid social situations. I mean, yes, big ones especially. But even individual conversations that somewhat necessary to have, I would shorten them or avoid them altogether if I could. And again, this affected my work attendance. This affected my life. Any setting where I knew I would have to be around people was affected by this avoidance behavior of just not wanting to be around people. If I was around people, not wanting to engage, I would avoid any type of engagement with other human beings that wasn't absolutely necessary. Part of that is you don't want people to realize how crazy you are at the time, right? Because it'll only be about 30 seconds before you start talking about how you feel, how you don't feel right, how your health, you're worried about your health. So there was a number of things that contributed to it. So the first one I mentioned is social situations. Guys, the next one is exercise. Any exercise. It got to the point where I avoided any exercise. And I am someone who's very driven by exercise. And even when I was quite heavy, I still exercised more than people would believe. It's a essential part of me feeling, like myself. And of course, since I found out that without exercise, your mental health isn't going to do very well. You're going to need to, you don't need to, go on, marathons or 5-mile hikes every day or anything like that, but you do need to exercise. We will suffer, our mental health will suffer when we don't. But I would avoid going to the gym, anything that raised my heart rate, walking on a treadmill. In the gym, I was more worried about dying with people, having a heart attack and dying around people I didn't know. And then when I'd go for a walk, I was worried I'd just die alone. I had this thing in my mind where, I would just die alone. People would find me later. If you guys have anxiety disorder, I hope, you understand what I'm talking about. These are not logical, sentiments. These are not logical things to think, but that's what's going through your mind constantly when you have anxiety disorder. And, I was having panic attacks on a regular basis as well. So literally anything that elevated my heart rate was something that, I desperately tried to avoid. So all forms of exercise became rare. And this obviously had a huge effect on my life. I got even heavier. And it's part of my personality since I was little. So this really had a major effect on my life. So that's the next avoidance behavior that I'm going to discuss with you guys is driving. This is a big one. And this is the one that'll creep up even to this day if I'm not careful. So driving in general got to the point where when I first started having these issues, I started feeling dizzy when I drove. And that's a very uncomfortable feeling to have when you're driving. So, I do think allergies and inner ear dysfunction may have contributed to the initial feeling while driving. But then, of course, it becomes part of your anxiety disorder. So I developed these horrible habits of avoiding. First of all, I was avoiding traffic. Closed access highways were a no-go. I'd have a panic attack anytime I tried to drive on like a freeway or a throughway where you can't really pull off. So I'd have to pull off. I would have a full-blown panic attack. And that's the environment where I had my first panic attack, just to give you guys some insight, in another country, no less. So yeah, the other thing I would do is I didn't like being in traffic. That would make me extremely uncomfortable. And, especially if I had to take a left turn and I had to wait to take it, I would hold my breath. And this was something that my wife brought to my attention that I was doing. But I wondered why every time at a light, when I took a left, I would start to feel like I was going to pass out, and it's because I wasn't breathing. So, it got, with all these factors added up, I drove almost nowheres, almost never. I only drove to work, and the only driving I did to work, I went a way where there was less traffic, even though it took longer and cost more in gas. I didn't care. So these are the types of avoidance behaviors, guys, that can develop. Driving is a big one. And if I'm not doing well with my mental health, I have to keep an eye on that, or else, even to this day, this avoidance behavior can start to come back. So, you have to know what these are, what you're doing, what you're changing, routines that you're changing because of your anxiety, because part of getting better is starting to do these things again, even though initially you're going to be uncomfortable. It's about doing them in moderation and building up. That's how you're going to be able to get rid of these avoidance behaviors. Next up is eating in front of people. So, eating, obviously, I weighed, at my zenith, I weighed 365 pounds. So I was eating, but I did not like eating in front of people at all. I barely ate at work. I wouldn't eat at work if I had to eat in front of people. And this was because every time I ate in front of people, I couldn't swallow. I felt like I was going to choke. This was horrible, guys. And then this would happen, like, even if we were invited to a party or something, you know, there were several times I did start to choke because I could not I could not eat in front of people. I could not swallow. This was a really weird one. But it definitely affected my life. I did not want to eat in front of people. So I wanted to make sure I included that one on this list. And then basically, and this is where I'll get into, just before I wrap up the video here. I don't want to do a long video. This last list of things can be anything for a lot of different people, but this was the result of clinical depression. So this avoidance behavior is anything I enjoyed. Hobbies, you know, being around my family, even praying. All of these things I started to avoid when I was clinically depressed. And I'll explain to you guys why. I didn't feel how I normally felt. These are things that I love, and I didn't have the right feeling inside me. So when you're around your family that you love more than you love yourself and you're not feeling it, that's an awful feeling. When you're engaged in a hobby that you enjoy, whether it's sports or, heck, even watching sports, just silly stuff, and you just get no joy from it at all, then you realize, you're not yourself. And that's why I've told you guys about clinical depression and how it feels like you're emotionally dead, how like someone stole your soul. And this makes you avoid things that you love. And I know that this is why people isolate, guys. I see that now. I always wondered why people who clearly love other people and care deeply would isolate themselves, and then it ends tragically sometimes. But that's why. Because when you're clinically depressed, you don't feel how you should feel. You can intellectually understand how much you care about your family. It's not like, you stop loving your family, or you stop loving the hobbies that you have, or, all the things that I mentioned. But because of that absence, those electrical impulses misfiring, and that just like you're flatlined emotionally, and it makes it very scary. So you end up avoiding things that you love. And that's the list of avoidance behaviors. And I don't often hear avoidance behaviors brought up as part of clinical depression, but let me tell you guys, it is. Definitely is. If you feel the way I feel when you're clinically depressed, you will avoid things because you will not want to be around things you love. Music, I stopped listening to music. I love music. But that's clinical depression. So anyways, that's about all I wanted to talk about in this video. The thing I did want to mention, though, is if you are in a place where you're experiencing these horrible avoidance behaviors, guys, don't despair. Don't give up. Don't feel like you can't. You can recover. I recovered. There's nothing special about me. I'm just a human, just like you. We're all in the same boat. And I just received treatment that I needed. And this may include medication. It may not include medication. But you need to make sure that if it's affecting your life, if you're starting to avoid things, you need to let someone you love and trust know. You should go and seek the help of a mental health professional. And the other thing I'll mention before I close the video is the big three. If the big three aren't in order, work on these. This is something you can do whether you have access to a doctor or not. And that is, get your sleep, get your exercise, and eat in a way where you're in control and food isn't controlling you. That's way easier said than done. A lot of us have sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome, You know, there's some of us that have obstacles that get in the way of exercise. But guys, if you get those three things in order, it's going to be the most important part of your recovery. It really will. It's going to trump medication. It's going to trump even therapy. Because my argument, my contention is, without being well rested, your mind is not going to be able to recover. One of the biggest things that led to my, initial diagnosis of panic disorder and anxiety disorder was I did not sleep. I was not sleeping hardly at all. 2 and 3 hours a night. I was a zombie. And these things, it's weird. It's like you lose all impulse control when you get in that scenario. And it was a nightmare. And that's when I developed panic attacks and anxiety disorder. And, I don't want you guys, if you aren't to that point, I don't want you to get to that point. So anyways, without rambling too long here, get your sleep, your exercise, and your diet in order. Guys, thanks so much for the engagement with the channel. I really appreciate it. If you know anybody who's maybe you're noticing they have avoidance behaviors, or then you're starting to wonder why they're not doing things they used to do, tell them about the channel. Have them watch the videos. At least they'll know they're not alone. Maybe that'll give them the courage to get the help they need. And that's the whole reason why I'm doing this. So thank you guys so much. And until my next video, take care.